Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Reception Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to address something that I don't think a lot of people are aware of because they probably haven't checked out their calendars. But let's just say that there might be a big issue on March 12th. So I actually saw a thing a couple of weeks ago. I was checking out my schedule and I was trying to figure out when the Academy Awards was going to be taking place because I typically want to make sure that I am caught up with what award shows are going to happen because I do watch them for the most part. Like I always watch the awards, take a look at what's happening, the speeches and everything like that. I watch all those, right? That's kind of my livelihood right there. And I noticed that the Oscars are going to be taking place on March 12th. And then the more I looked at the date, the more I realized that date looks very familiar. And so I took a look at The Last of Us. Because The Last of Us is now playing, as of right now, it is now currently airing on HBO Max. 9 episodes that we're going to be looking forward to. 3 have already dropped so far. But let's see when The Last of Us finale is going to drop. Oh boy, March 12th. Yeah, we have a big conflict on that night of March 12th because not only do we have the Oscars and not only do we have The Last of Us playing, The Last of Us is airing its final episode that night, that same night from 9 to 10 or 9 to 10:30, and that's going to be a very interesting thing. Why? Because well, let's look at this for one thing, right? It's the big thing is viewership numbers. And when we look into this, right, like for someone like me, this is very devastating because I watch the Academy Awards almost every year. I don't think I've missed one in like a long time. But then at the same time, I'm really enjoying The Last of Us. Like I am so immersed into this whole incredible story that is Joel and Ellie, and seeing kind of how their relationship transforms into this apocalyptic dystopian world. Like that is so devastating for me as someone who loves movies, loves TV shows, that this is happening all in the same night, right? And this is where I'm going to address, right? So for one thing, when we are looking at The Last of Us, we are looking at the fact that they have been seeing such huge viewership numbers, right? From episode 1 to episode 2, they saw a 22% viewership increase. And that's just because of the word of mouth, the fact that it is getting such critical acclaim from both critics and audiences. There's a lot of people who are enjoying this series. This is a show that is becoming a phenomenal to the point where it's almost reaching the level of Game of Thrones, House of Dragons sort of situation, right? So that's just for one thing. And yet, when we look at the Oscars have this issue where each year we've seen how they see a huge decline in viewership and they're always struggling to determine, okay, well, what can we do to try and improve viewership, right? And I'll just talk about that in a second. And of course, like, I feel like as we get more and more closer to March 12th, a lot of people are going to become a bit more aware that the Oscars and The Last of Us finale are going to be on the same night. So it's a matter of, okay, are you going to pick and choose which one you're going to watch? Now, granted, the Oscars is almost a 3 hour, I mean, it's never really 3 hours. I mean, it's supposed to be broadcast as a 3 hour award show, but it ends up being pushed like 3.5. I don't think I've seen a 4 hour show in a long time, but I would say three to 3.5 sort of show, because of the fact that the speech do extend the runtime of the awards. And it's just only that one itty bit from 9 to 10 that we're going to see kind of the shift of people viewing the Oscars to Last of Us. That being said, the fact that they are on the same day might become a bit of a problem for the Oscars because, let's be honest, you're dealing with a situation where, it's not just any sort of competition. It's not like it's any sort of mid-episode that's happening in the middle of a show. This is a finale of The Last of Us. A lot of people are going to be invested in The Last of Us finale, the season 1 finale, now that we know that season 2 is going to happen. So a lot of people are going to wonder, okay, I need to watch this finale. What would this mean for season 2? I want to know what this would lead up to season 2, right? That's going to be the big case for why a lot of people are going to be more focused on Last of Us finale because of sort of this whole big buzz around it, as well as sort of the questions that a lot of people have, whether or not you are a gamer or not, right? And having seen that third episode, we do think that, I mean, yeah, having seen that third episode, it looks more and more like we're going to see far more changes happening more and more as we get into the season. And again, what would this mean for season 2 that's supposed to be based on part 2 of the video game? Are they going to make more drastic changes? Because again, from what I'm aware of, part 2 of the game is a bit more of a mixed match in terms of reception. At least my sister, she didn't like it. That's what I get from a lot of people who don't appreciate the storyline that they have for part 2. Whereas there are some defenders out there who do think that it is a very good game, and that they're just people who are taking it a bit too far in terms of the criticism about it. But I can't comment about that. I've never played the game. I can't say what is true, what is not. I cannot comment about that. I don't know what happens either. So that's, again, something I wouldn't know. That being said, right, as I mentioned before, the Oscars are having a situation where if they don't see an increase in viewership, that's going to become a problem, right? I believe it was 2 Oscars ago that the Academy Award that they had the lowest of the lowest viewership numbers ever, right? I believe it was just 10 million viewers. That is not a good sign. That is not a very good sign. I believe last year they did see a increase, but not by a lot. I mean, 16 million is not something to be proud of. I mean, I remember a time where the Oscars was being viewed with 30 million viewers, right? Like, that's at least decent enough, but 10 million, that's not a good sign, right? And considering the fact that Last of Us Episode 2 had 5.2 million viewers, I believe, or at least 5 million viewers, that is about 5 million viewers who probably may not watch the Oscars. I mean, not as if there are mutually exclusive audiences right there, but I'm just proving a point that there's going to be some issues with it, because I do think that when you have people like me who do watch everything like the Oscars, the awards, then there's a big show like The Last of Us where, you know, a lot of us are, you know, tuned into watching it. You are kind of losing the younger fan base, because I think when it comes to the Oscars, right, they do understand that the reason why they're seeing a decline in viewership is because of the younger demographic. They don't have their attention. They don't really, you know, cater to them as much as they should. Last year, they tried to do this whole thing with best scene, most popular film sort of thing, to really kind of, you know, push that younger viewer audience to get in and watch the Oscars. And I guess it proved a success, because they did get a 6 million increase from the one before, which isn't something to be too proud of, but at least there is progress. But now that, you know, you have a show like The Last of Us where most people who are watching it is a younger audience, like me, like my sister, like a lot of my family members who are young, my relatives and all that sort of stuff, who are watching The Last of Us, they could care less about the Oscars, right? So why am I pointing this out? Like, I mean, there's always going to be that question of whether or not this would require the Oscars to move their thing, right? I mean, right now they're in a very big situation where, yes, the Oscars is happening on March 12th, which happens to be on the same day as The Last of Us season finale. Okay, great. Now, the thing is that they probably didn't imagine that the show was going to be as big as it did get, almost in a level of House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones sort of level. If that's the case, that's something to be very concerned about, because again, you're losing the young demographic that you need to really sustain just to sustain the Oscar awards, to keep it going on and on and on. And if you don't have that audience, then who knows, the Oscars might not even become a thing anymore, kind of becoming its own Golden Globe in a sense, right? So there's definitely going to be questions about that. Like, does this mean that the Oscars can move their award ceremony? I mean, I highly doubt it. Usually when it comes to booking these, booking a slot, especially as something as awards, you have to get this done at least a year in advance. And if they were to try and change it, I don't think that would be possible, because you're looking at about less than a month and a half from now of the award ceremony, where it's supposed to be telecasted by March 12th. I don't think there's going to be any changes for that, unfortunately, unless they are really scared that they really need that young audience to really keep it going, that maybe they might have to invest in pushing off the awards. Who knows? I can't really speak to that. I mean, when we look into it, it's not the first time the Oscars had to, push off, a ceremony further later on. I believe the Oscars from 2 years ago, or was it? I don't think I think from the one 2 years ago, they made it just right off the mark and missing off on the pandemic, because the pandemic, I believe, started just right after that. So I think they had dodged it. But even that being the case, I believe there has been one case where the Oscars did get moved because of the whole situation with pandemic. It could have been the one from 2 years ago, the one where they had the lowest, or I believe I might be mistaking that, because they did change their venue at that time. I do know that they changed their venue 2 years ago, but I can't recall if that was they had changed their scheduling. I believe they did. I do think they had changed it from, I believe, March to maybe April. I would have to look at that. I have to double check that. It's been quite a while, but if that is say, why not, right? If the Oscars has a history of pushing their, their telecasting for a month or so later, then I don't see why not. I mean, again, right now the Oscars are a very tight situation in regards to whether or not they're going to see a viewership increase. I mean, for one thing, they are going to be seeing sort of this phase of, Everything Ever All at Once. A lot of people are supporting that film. A lot of people are loving that film. A lot of people who love this film is the younger demographic, right? So people like me, my friend Marilyn, we all love this film because, again, it really kind of goes into a much more complex situation about the multiverse, but doing so in a way that is very meaningful. But again, are you able to get enough of that audience to stick around and watch, the Oscars, or are you going to lose a lot of them because of The Last of Us? Because The Last of Us is the biggest thing. The Last of Us is the biggest trend right now. That's what everyone's watching. That's the one that everyone's enjoying, let alone that is the finale that you are dealing with. So yeah, that's something I wanted to mention. So if you didn't know, the Oscars and The Last of Us season finale is on the same night, March 12th. I believe the Oscars is going to start at 8. I believe The Last of Us is going to start at 9. There's going to be that 9 to 10 sort of situation. Like, a lot of people may, just switch around from the Oscars, which, I mean, I guess that's okay. Like, that still counts as viewership. But also at the same time, I think a lot of people are going to be so invested in Last of Us that I don't think people are going to care to even just watch the beginning and end of the Oscars. I think that people are going to be very invested in The Last of Us season finale. People are going to be talking about it. Maybe do you think that it's worth for the Oscars to push it, because that's a big demographic that you really need to kind of keep the Oscars alive. So that's something I want to mention, because that's something that that came to mind, and something to inform you all about because of this conflict. I know this week there's going to be the Super Bowl as well as The Last of Us episode 4, which, I mean, again, this is kind of going into midway through the series, so it isn't as big of an issue as like a season finale. But we are dealing with kind of the first circumstance of it. I guess we can say is that we'll see. We'll see by this week what happens. Does the Super Bowl lose off on its, big viewership from The Last of Us? Because for me, I could care less about the Super Bowl. I don't care about it. I don't watch it. And I think that when you are looking at the target audience with the Super Bowl versus The Last of Us, there isn't really a exclusive sort of group that watches both. Like, I think there are pretty separate. But again, we'll see. We'll see when the numbers do come out for the Super Bowl. That does this affect the fact that, did it get affected by The Last of Us episode 4? Did they play a role in its, lower or higher viewership? We'll see about that. Maybe the opposite with The Last of Us, because The Last of Us is conflicting with the Super Bowl. Like, will The Last of Us deal with that decrease in viewership? We'll see about that this week, next week, and then maybe that will determine what's going to happen with the Oscars. But yeah, that's something I wanted to mention right there, because again, that was interesting to find. But let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think that the Oscars being on the same night as the Last of Us finale is a huge bummer? What are you going to be watching? What are you going to be prioritizing? Are you going to watch the Oscars? Are you going to watch the Last of Us season finale? I'm probably going to be watching the Oscars, the entirety of it, just because it is sort of a one-time sort of thing that I don't want to really go back into, like, the re-airings of it, because it is being announced live. Whereas for The Last of Us, at least I can watch it later on. So that's kind of my, rationale to it. Like, I at least can watch it later on and then, talk about it later. But because it's going to be a big-ass conversation for a couple of days, right? But What are your thoughts? Are you going to do what I'm going to do? Are you going to do vice versa? Do you only care about Last of Us? Do you only care about the Oscars? Do you think the Oscars should push, or do you think, well, I highly doubt that HBO is going to move the Last of Us season finale date, but do you think the Oscars need to move? Do you think it's worth keeping an eye on with what's going to happen with the conflict between the Super Bowl and Last of Us Episode 4? Will that be a determining factor to look at in terms of what's going to happen, and be kind of this forewarning of what would happen on March 12th. We'll see about that. Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.